Good morning, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We're going to be talking about two things today, which we typically talk about this time of year, which is the tropics as well as our temperature trends over the next couple of weeks. And of course, with weather, these things are fluid, so be sure to keep checking back in with our content here over the next several days as we continue to provide continuous updates on the topics of discussion that we are going to talk about today. I want to start first with sort of where we're at right now and where we're heading, and a couple things to point out. The first thing is that we have the remnants of a tropical depression that, if you guys recall, made landfall just in the last 24 hours across the Wilmington, North Carolina area, and even just to the north of Myrtle Beach. That has now moved inland into places like Charlotte, Rock Hill, and up towards Asheville and the Appalachian Smoky Mountain chain. And this system was a wonderful example of not underestimating tropical depressions. For example, I think I still have it up here on the tabs. Actually, I do not, but you're going to have to take me at my word for this. We had some pretty significant flooding across much of North Carolina. We even saw upwards of 20 plus inches of rainfall near the area circled in pink. And at one point, we were seeing rainfall rates of over 3 inches per hour. So just like what we saw with Debbie earlier this year, and actually I should say the last few weeks, Debbie wasn't a prolific wind producer, but she did drop a lot of rain across the Carolinas too, and that can be pretty deadly. So we have to always consider the hazards and the progression of these storms, not just the strength of the winds. A lot of people like talking about the winds, and that's really the big eye catcher when it comes to hurricanes and tropical storms. But remember, we have other hazards. We have flooding we have to talk about. We have high tide. We have all these different variables, storm surge we have to consider. So once again, a wonderful example of not to ever underestimate a tropical depression or a tropical storm. They can also be deadly as well. Meanwhile, out towards the west coast, we do continue to see this big bowling ball low that's just spinning out towards the Pacific Northwest and specifically out towards the Sierra Nevadas. This is bringing, I would actually argue, some much needed rainfall across eastern Idaho and southern Montana, where it has been very dry. And this is also an area that has been dealing with rapid wildfire conflagration over the last several weeks. This is an area that truly does need the rain, and this should help with some of those mitigation efforts. But the same cannot be said for areas of Southern California and the Central Valley. While there is that low pressure that is bringing some of those cooler temperatures, the wildfire concerns will certainly continue for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, out towards the central United States, we're seeing quite the opposite to that of the West Coast. A lot of dry conditions, with the exception of the Central Plains seeing some showers and thunderstorms this morning, but for the most part, pretty dry, and also, once again, very much above normal for the lower Great Lakes, the south central United States, and even up towards the upper Midwest as we continue to deal with that area of high pressure that's going to keep those temperatures warm through the rest of this week and potentially even as far as early to middle of next week. We're not going to see much variation there with our temperatures here in the immediate short term. So above normal temperatures continues to be the trend for the central United States, and continuously for the Northeast and New England, more of those fluctuating temperatures. Today we're likely to see sort of around normal, maybe some below normal temperatures with some of these rain showers that are blowing off of that depression in the Carolinas. Could see some mostly overcast conditions for the eastern United States, especially the Northeast New England, even up towards Buffalo. Could be seeing some of those cooler than normal temperatures. But again, over this same week and a half span, expecting to see more of a temperature variation, or we'll see some days that are slightly above normal and then below normal and then sort of in between. It's going to be a lot of variation there. Let's turn our attention, though, before we do talk about the tropics. I mean, since we are on the topic of temperatures, let me just show you those trends here on our ensemble view. This is, of course, the GEFS. And actually, let me bounce back here a second. Let's go a little bit outside of this region. We'll do the continental United States, and then we will look here at our temperature anomalies. And actually, let's start first with our jet stream, and then we're going to jump into anomalies on the GFS. Again, as we talked about, we have a big bowling ball trough out towards the Sierra Nevadas, negatively tilted, meaning it's essentially a negative tilted trough. That can imply some showers and thunderstorms even for areas of the Four Corner states when we see that kind of tilt in our jet stream. And by the way, this is the 500 millibar map. This is, of course, our jet stream product. As we go forward into the rest of the week, you do see that trough we were talking about continue to move off towards the north and east. As it does so, we see a continuation of high pressure, this time now encompassing the Carolinas and also the lower Great Lakes and the south central United States. So that really no change here. We're sort of in this blocking pattern where this high pressure is not going to move very much. It's going to stay relatively stagnant. And you can see that as we go into your Thursday and Friday, still, once again, area of high pressure, now this time still encompassing the central United States, south central United States, remaining in place. You're going to see that on our temperature anomalies be reflected with this pattern. And as we get into the weekend, we do see a little bit of a flattening with our jet, which would imply a little bit more of sort of a moderation of our temperatures. Not maybe so much to what you may expect. We're not expecting a big cooling trend, but nonetheless a little bit more of a flattening to where we're not seeing that really strong, ample high pressure across the central United States. So we should see a little bit of a downtrend in our temperatures early next week, but still running the chance at some above normals for a large swath of the country. Like I said at the beginning of the video, northeast New England, the south, and the mid-Atlantic should remain relatively, and I would say even the Atlantic and northeast, kind of just fluctuating with temperatures over time. Not expecting as much consistency with our above normals as we would for the central United States. And towards early next week, we could even be seeing a return to above normal temperatures for places like the Southwest. And this is very concerning to me. I know we don't really talk about wildfires much on this channel, simply because we are talking mostly about temperatures and tropics, those direct impacts as it relates to nat gas energy. But a secondary impact can be wildfire. There are certainly implications with that too. And, once again, we're going to be looking at California for the potential for additional wildfire conflagration, potentially at some point next week. So we got to keep a very close eye on that too. And not just that, but we're going to have to keep a very close eye on the tropics. More on that here in a moment. Before we dive into that, as promised, let me show you some of those temperature anomalies. So we'll go over here to our standard temperature anomalies, and you're going to see a lot of what we talked about reflected on this chart. So as we head into your Thursday and Friday, look at where you see the red. This is indicating our above to even well above normal temperatures, and sure enough, they are focused and concentrated right where that high pressure is expected to set up. So we're actually seeing that high pressure in place now. We're going to see a little bit of some fluctuation on the high pressure placement as we get to early next week. Not so much this week, but as we get to early next week, we'll see that meander back to the south central United States. That's essentially going to imply very little to no change in the temperatures for this part of the country. We do see some of those below normal temperatures for most of the week as we head towards the southwestern U.S. and really just some at or slightly above normal temperatures for the far reaches of Idaho and Montana. But for the most part, the main storyline for our temperatures this week and early next is certainly going to be the central United States. As we also move forward, by the time we get to early next week, you see once again, right, the central United States is still relatively above normal, but as we talked about just 2 minutes ago, we see the West Coast begin to build back its above normal temperatures with the arrival of that upper level ridge, that area of high pressure off the Pacific. So there's certainly, those are the main storylines for our temperatures, at least over the next week and a half, close to 2 weeks. And so with that, I mean, not really much change. In terms of the foreseeable future, let me go ahead and show you the WX Rogue page before I forget. And be sure to check out this page, guys. Some of you have already done so and have provided us some feedback with that and asked questions. I will be providing a survey for the rest of you to fill out and provide us with feedback. I encourage all of you to do it. It's going to help us improve this page over time, both the freemium product as well as the premium version. But what I want to show you here is just to kind of really summarize and wrap up in a bow what we just talked about. you can see everything that was discussed in terms of our temperatures reflected also in these charts. So for example, if we're looking just at the GFS, or population weighted cooling degree days, we see that the west south central United States remains elevated here, right? We're talking about 16, 17 cooling degree days. The Pacific actually stays relatively low within about 6 to 7 cooling degree days, which if you remember, just within the last week, that number was higher. It was actually up towards where you see the south central United States, closer to like that 14 to 16 range. And so it's come down quite a bit. But as that upper level ridge builds out west, after that big bowling ball low passes through, you see a big jump in those cooling degree days, and understandably so, because at that point we would be seeing a large uptick because of that area of high pressure that moves in. Meanwhile, places like west, north, central, and the middle Atlantic, we do see these relatively higher, but we eventually do see a downtrend. And this is correlated, of course, to not just the temperature, but our population. That's in case you're wondering why these are lower than, say, the west and south central. The heat is certainly a factor as to why it's elevated, but remember, because it's a lower population weight versus, say, the west, south, central, and in this case, the Pacific, it's going to understandably have a little bit of a lower value because you are factoring in that population weight. But either way, the main trend here in the short term is the central United States remaining elevated with those cooling degree days, with an eventual downtrend possibly middle of next week. And meanwhile, the Pacific, while it is going to be rather cooler for the short term, we are going to see that heat build back pretty quickly as we get towards the middle of next week. So be sure to check out this page. We also have the premium that is up. This is a preview of what that will look like. This is just a scope and really just partially the content that we'll be providing on the premium part. One of the things that we'll be doing too is, you guys know that I've been providing video content. I've also been doing the Discord posts. Well, we're going to be really amping that up with the content we provide on the premium portion. So think of what we're doing right now, but more kind of stepping up a little bit, right, with our content and being content driven and sort of walking through a lot of these numbers. Because listen, this is a lot of data to decipher through. It's no different than any weather website you may access on a daily basis, and there's a lot of them out there that you can download. But it's important to understand the work behind the data. And I think that's why, when you look at Energy Road, for example, not to go on a long diatribe here, but, Brian and Bill, one of the things that makes them amazing is that, they can go behind the numbers, right? There's data out there. There's numbers that you can retrieve yourselves, but it's about walking through it. And this product is no different than that methodology. It's about being able to communicate this effectively to all of you, to better understand the trends, to understand these different models and what they mean and their biases, their use case, utilization, all of that. And I think that's what's going to make a really well-rounded product. So I'm very excited about it. I know Brian and Bill are incredibly excited. Hell, I know you guys are excited about it. So you can expect a survey here posted in the next week. I highly suggest and recommend you guys fill that out. It is completely anonymous. Be on the lookout for it. And it is going to be very helpful for us continuing to improve this product for our future subscribers of the premium version. The last topic, though, I do want to talk about before I forget is the Tropics. And by the way, it's been rather quiet again. We've went from the activity we saw. Remember, we had Beryl earlier in the year. We had Debbie. And then, we just had our system move through the Gulf, that hurricane that moved through. And I'm blanking on the name now. I guess it's too early in the morning. But I think it was Ernesto? No, it's not. I'll type it in the chat because I'm blanking on the name. But you guys know exactly the system I'm talking about. It was the hurricane that had moved through Louisiana earlier in the week. We were expecting, and I got to say I was expecting a little bit more of an uptick in activity following that, but we're expecting to see a little bit more of a lull once again for the Gulf and the Atlantic. Now, of course, we do have a system out towards the Atlantic, and I will also post that in Discord, a map of that. That is, of course, Tropical Storm Gordon, but that is not expected to make landfall. That's going to be completely out to sea. It is potentially going to become close to a major hurricane, but it's going to be out in the central Atlantic. It's going to be no concern to the United States at this time. So, what's next, right? There's really not much activity. So, is the season done, right? Now, that same conversation we talked about a couple weeks ago is once again being talked about now. And my answer to that question is no, we're not. So, let's take a look here at the GEFS ensemble. All these little red marks that you see here, and let's actually get a little bit closer so you guys can see it. There we go. We'll look here at the Western Atlantic. These little red markers are indicative of potential low pressure systems that could form, right? So we're looking here at the GEFS, which is an ensemble, and it's taking essentially 20 different solutions and plotting them. So this isn't like 7 to 8 low pressure systems that are marked here in the Carolinas, for example. This would be just one, but all these little red markers that you see here are indicating the members clustering around a certain point, which tells us that it's very confident in the low placement. So it's a really good gauge as far as confidence for forecasting, right? It's not just forecasting for an event, but it's also the probabilistic. What's the probability that a hurricane or tropical storm makes landfall? What's the probability that a low situates over a given area? So it's a really, really good use case here. So as we go through the next several days, and really as we head into what would be next week, we don't see much activity until we get to what would be, I think it's, this Sunday, an uptick in activity in the Caribbean in the Yucatan. Now, what's interesting about this, at the moment right now, we have an area of high pressure that is currently spinning clockwise, and that's once again shunting convection in the Gulf. But what this is implying, and what you can't really see on this map, is that high pressure that's going to keep the central United States warm and dry, well, that's eventually going to move off towards the east. It has to. If we know anything about just conventional meteorology, these systems have to move oriented to the flow. Our winds move from west to east, so that high has to move at some point, right? It's got to be pushed and essentially advected to the other direction, in this case, east. So, as a result of that, we could have some low pressure form somewhere in the United States, and that would create an environment very much conducive for a ramp up of convection in the Caribbean, and especially towards the Yucatan and just to the southeast of the Bay of Campeche. If we take this a step further and play this out, we can see a lot of activity begin to sprout up even after that. So this weekend's going to be really interesting. We could potentially be seeing yet another tropical system that impacts somewhere within this Gulf region, anywhere between Florida and truly the Gulf of Mexico, and hell, I would even highlight Houston because of the uncertainty factor. So we are not done. The ensembles continue to hint at this. We are in a very progressive pattern here in the United States. That implies that we are expected to eventually see a low pressure form somewhere in the central United States. That would help to reignite and reinvigorate convection in the Caribbean, because that same high pressure that you see here near Bermuda, remember, high pressure spins clockwise, and look where the flow is oriented, right near the Caribbean. So that flow moves off land. Once it moves off land and moves into the warm waters of the Caribbean, that actually serves as a catalyst to a convective environment. So we have to watch this very closely. We are not done with the tropics. I cannot stress that enough. I know a lot of times it's habit of even me to look at the Atlantic Basin for the next tropical system, but even this time of year, we have to turn our attention more to the Gulf and Caribbean, because all it takes is for some initiation in this type of pattern like this to set up a convective mode in the Caribbean and the Yucatan, and now we're talking about a potential second tropical system in essentially the last couple weeks, right? So a little bit more of an uptick in activity here as we're seeing with our current tropical pattern, and also what we're expecting here as we head into this weekend. So we're going to keep a very, very close eye on that, because that could have implications for the middle of late to next week. If you have any questions in the meantime, go ahead and post those in the Discord channel. Cash, thank you again for your question yesterday. Appreciate you. And hopefully that resource I provided was of use. For the rest of you, have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.